Hello out there. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you. I need that energy. I welcome you to this session, this afternoon session. First of all, let me say what a great run we've had for the last 3 days. I have enthusiasm and hope that throughout this Transform Africa Summit, we are going to have a great time. We are going to live here, energized and ready to transform Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon's session is Smart Infrastructure, Developing Ubiquitous, Secure, and Sustainable ICT Infrastructure. Now, there may be questions all the way from the beginning, but I do trust that I've got such a wonderful team here of panelists that we will try and give you our vision and also try and answer your questions. Yesterday, during the summit, during the presidential summit, we had a wonderful set of leaders, digital leaders, digital presidents as they called them, and managing or governing over digital citizens. Now, we asked those leaders, we asked those presidents to dream and dream big. And once they share their dreams, they become our vision. I think not a single one of those presidents, I believe, is not dreaming about having a smart Africa. And to build a smart Africa, we need smart infrastructure. There are questions about what that means, but as I said, we'll answer it as we go along. Let me briefly tell you who I have here, and not in order of the way they are sitting. I have Noor Kirkadi. I have Sherry House. I asked her whether I should call her Sherry. I also have Ralph Corey. I have Pierre Dandiju. I have Elizabeth Miguala, Guillermo Alacon, David Ochanda. Yeah, that's all I have. Okay, the way I propose that we run this, I'm going to ask each one of the honorable participants to introduce themselves a little bit more fully than I just did, and to also make a brief statement about the subject at hand. And then I will give them an opportunity later to expound on their statements. Now, before I give them an opportunity, I want to ask you, if you are like me, and those who are not like me, you probably in the morning go around, shave, use your electronic toothbrush, put on the coffee maker to brew some coffee, and in the meantime, you're probably answering your mobile phone, and it all works. That is because each one of those items that I've mentioned are manufactured and they communicate according to ITU standards. Yesterday, we met, among the presidents, we met President Salva Kiir of South Sudan. Who knows his telephone number? Or at least who knows that he's in South Sudan and therefore the country code is 211. His telephone number you don't know because it's not shared. It's not a common number. Each one of the nearly 7 billion SIM cards out there are unique. Each one of the countries out there have got a unique country code, 250 for this country. Those country codes and the structure for those individual numbers, unique numbers, are issued by the ITU. Most of you flew into this country for this conference. How many of you were confident that that aircraft would find the airport, the right airport? We all fly, we take it for granted. Those aircrafts that fly, those aircrafts that send a beacon, those aircrafts that find the right airports, yes, you guessed who facilitates that. We issue those as well. How many of you are confident that the hundreds of satellites out there, that there won't be an unknown satellite that will fall from its orbit, go run into another one, and come crashing to Earth? Yes. Your confidence is well deserved, and that is because the ITU is the central registry for all satellites up there and their orbits. I'm very proud to say I serve you in all those aspects as the ITU Regional Director for Africa, and I sit in Addis. So let me call on the rest of my panel to please tell us who they are.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm Pierre Dangino. I'm Vice President of ICANN. ICANN stands for the Internet Corporation for assigned names and numbers. And I'll have time to talk more about that later on. But let me also say that I'm quite happy to be here, and thanks to the invitation that was extended to us and ICANN. But personally, I would like also to say that I'm so happy to be here because a few years ago, back there, I was in this country. And the first, what they call NICI, I don't know, some of you might understand those things, NICI, there are policies that were launched in this country. And I was the one who hired the consultants to do those jobs and review those documents. And I'm so happy that some of the things are happening here, definitely. So now, having said that, my job at ICANN is about stakeholders' engagement. We all use internet. But as Andrew had just said, we don't actually care what is happening behind the internet. Why does it resolve? Because there is some infrastructure behind the internet, and there are critical infrastructure. And domain names that you are using is important, but machine actually don't read those names. Machine reads, names or numbers. How do you translate this one? And which table of conversion you are using? And someone needs to actually coordinate all of those. And this is what ICANN does. I'm a vice president because, the ICANN has started now its internationalization. ICANN is headquartered in Los Angeles, but now it's having some regional, offices around the world, and some staff, outposted. And I'm the first one from Africa, so taking care of Africa and actually engaging Africans to come into ICANN and contribute to the policy development. I won't take much time because I think I will have time to elaborate on those things later on. But in terms of smart infrastructure, and as Andrew said, we will be certainly defining this as we move on. As far as I'm concerned, of course, it's key that, broadband strategies are important in our countries. And as we are speaking, there are so many there's potential there. We speak of the mobile, telephony, and we also believe in data. Data is going to be the key. And how do you really move those data if you don't have the appropriate infrastructure? So I would say that whatever manifesto we are signing here should keep on insisting on having this broadband strategy in each countries. But I would like us to not forget that we do have these critical resources I mentioned. It will be interesting to know how Africa is using those resources. For instance, IPv4. How are we moving from IPv4 to IPv6, which are protocols that are quite important. Today in Africa, we are having close to 6 to 8 countries that are really rolling out the IPv6. We need to do more on that. And we have questions where we say, okay, most places now are they don't have any IPv4 pool anymore. In Africa, we still have some. We have 32% of it, something like 50 million of IP addresses, but this is nothing. So your network needs to be compliant. How do you do that? These are, it's important for us. And if you are looking for smart, infrastructure, there are many, many other things behind this internet. The root server itself, you need some copy of this root server in Africa. Practically 5 to 6 countries are having these copies. We need more on that as well. And I would like to finish also saying that, well, we've gone a long way. We've done a few things, infrastructure-wise. I believe, data is now what we should be doing. How do we produce this data? How do we really organize ourselves so that, well, we really become a producer, not a consumer? 5 to 6% of African data is on the website. Some of those are produced, outside of Africa, but yet there is potential here. Alongside our local languages, we do have IDN, Internationalized Domain Name, which gives us the tool to have, the web speak our language. How are we working on that, possibly? So I believe that we do have so many potential, and we need to work on those. And I do believe that if we are to have smart internet or smart whatever infrastructure, we need to really make sure that Africa is a market. Africa has to be a market. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm working on what we are calling the domain name market in Africa.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
David.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Ochanda, and I work with Ericsson in sub-Saharan Africa. Ericsson, for those who are not aware, is a telecommunications vendor. And happy to be here to speak more around Transforming Africa, and also happy to support Transform Africa Summit. Ericsson in sub-Saharan Africa covers 43 countries, and Rwanda is one of them. We have a large office here in Rwanda, and we work with all the 3 operators. My main area in Ericsson is around regulatory affairs. That's what I do. I will be talking later more about smart infrastructure and how do we encourage investments, new investments, the second wave of investments into smart infrastructure so that we can roll out more of this infrastructure and so that the broadband, more and more users can access broadband. A lot of work has gone into the supply side. A lot of more work needs to go into the demand side. So I'll be talking more later about how do we engage all the key stakeholders that we work with on a daily basis to be able to accelerate this process of getting broadband to the masses. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Yes, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Noel Kakuldi. As Andrew mentioned, I work for NSN, which stands for Nokia Solutions and Networks. I spoke earlier this morning on a separate panel around smart education, and I'd really like to sort of start off by referring to, as we touched on this morning, if we look at to create a requirement, over the past 2 days, we've had, obviously, an issue bringing our mobile phones into the conference. But let me just ask you this quickly. If you're going to give up one service, which service would that be? Could you give up your voice service, or could you give up your data service? Interesting. So if we basically, I think the answer is fairly clear. And obviously, over data, we can handle voice over IP. So if the requirement within this room is I can't live out without my data services, how does that differentiate us from the 85 to 90% of Africans who don't have access to broadband? That is why we're here. And just as NSN, we have a vision by 2020. We believe that on average, there will be 1 gigabyte of data used per person per day, and it needs to be delivered profitably. Think about that. 1 gigabyte of personalized data per day delivered profitably, on average. Now, there's a number of areas that go into that, and we'll talk about that through the panel, but one area I wanted to talk about, to enable that to happen, you need to increase the capacity of our networks 1,000 times. Now, that sounds a lot. What it basically means is you double your data every year for 10 years. That's 2 to the power of 10, 1024. That's how we get to the 1,000 times. We've been talking about this for a number of years as NSN, and just the way we break it down is to achieve that sort of level of capacity, we need to have 10 times the performance of our networks, 10 times the amount of cells in the networks, and 10 times the amount of spectrum. And we'll talk again about those 3 different areas as we go through them. So just think about that for a moment. So mobile broadband is our focus. And mobile broadband, just as we refer to it, doesn't mean a particular technology. It could be 2G, GSM, Edge, GPRS. It could be HSPA, wideband CDMA, and it could be LTE, as we saw from the demonstrations yesterday. So that's our focus. NSN completely focused around the mobile broadband. And again, we're moving towards that vision of we talked about 1 gigabyte of personalized data per user per day, delivered profitably. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor. Elizabeth?
Thank you very much, Andrew, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Elizabeth Migwala, and I work for a company called Qualcomm. In that company, I head the government affairs for Sub-Saharan Africa, about 47 countries. And if I could characterize my role, I would say that the value I add to Qualcomm is to interface with government on the continent. And we do that so that we can understand and truly appreciate the plans, the aspirations of our policymakers and all the players in the industry, which I can take back to Qualcomm, which is headquartered in San Diego, California, and use that information to inform Qualcomm's strategies towards Africa. So Qualcomm is not a vendor. You're unlikely to see us selling any device or infrastructure, but we are an innovation company. We innovate, we invent, we share, license out our intellectual property to our manufacturing partners, some of whom are sitting with me on this podium, to manufacture devices and infrastructure to drive the kind of networks that we are aspiring for. So for me, sitting on this podium, I probably shouldn't be a panelist. I'm really here to listen, to see if I can glean information from yourselves that can help us address what we believe is the last remaining opportunity for countries such as ours. Now, having said that, I didn't ask the moderator for permission, so I'm going to apologize after the fact. But I think before we start this discussion, I would really want to be comfortable that we're all speaking about the same thing. So I'm going to ask a question for which I will not require you to answer because I haven't had the permission from the moderator. But I think the answer to this question will help us all be sure that we're talking about the same thing. So if I was to ask one or two or any of you here, when we say broadband, because this session is talking about us, policies to ensure a competitive broadband market. So if I was to go around this room and ask you or pick on one of you and say, what is broadband? Is there anybody who can define that? I leave that with you, and hopefully when my turn comes and we start conversing, we can take it up from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think you should know something about Elizabeth. It doesn't matter whether you say, I give you permission or not. She'll take it anyway. But it was a good one. Thank you, Elizabeth. Sherry.
Thank you. Just one point of order. It's Carrie. It's okay. Everyone gets it wrong. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. And special thanks to the organizers of this event. I've been working closely with the government of Rwanda for the last few months, and I think we all owe them a big round of applause for all the work that the sponsors and the government have managed to pull together. It's been, I think, a fantastic event in the last few days. For those of you who don't know me, I am with the GSM Association. You probably have heard of us because we put on Mobile World Congress every year in Barcelona. I've seen quite a few familiar faces that I saw this year in February. So, of course, everyone is welcome this next year. It should be another fantastic event. The GSM Association is the trade association that represents over 800 mobile phone operators worldwide. We are in more than 220 countries. We also work really closely with handset manufacturers, equipment operators, vendors, generally companies within the mobile ecosystem. My job in particular is I work within our regulatory and government affairs team in public policy, specifically focusing on sub-Saharan Africa. And I work very closely with a number of governments, ministries, regulators, regional institutions such as the ATU and ECOWAS and IACO. I've met a number of you here to really look at what we can do to make sure that we are regionally harmonized on mobile broadband. And I think one of the telling points of this conference is it's actually the Transform Africa conference. And I think there's a lot of, there have been some amazing ideas that have been thrown around over the last few days, but one of the things we're really looking to do is seeing how can we harmonize on a regional level for mobile broadband, get spectrum allocated in the digital dividend that's not going to further fragment the market, that will enable, countries throughout the sub-Saharan region to join a global market. We've got a number of countries within Latin America right now that are focusing on the digital dividend, 700, 800 megahertz on the APT band plan. We've just had the United Arab Emirates announced that they'll be supporting this plan recently. APAC is obviously leading on this, so there's a huge opportunity here when we talk about infrastructure to go beyond infrastructure within Africa and really look at what can we do today as policymakers, as the private sector, as consumers, to ensure that Africa is joining a global market and is going to be able to enjoy the benefits that mobile broadband can bring to everyone.
Thank you very much. Let me acknowledge here that GSMA is a very, very strong partner of the ITU and was a very strong partner in Connect Africa. So you can understand her passion in speaking about GSM, but also in smart infrastructure. Guillermo.
Yeah, my name is Guillermo Larcón. I work in Alcatel-Lucent. I'm Mexican, living in Paris. 25 years in the company. Have done almost everything from installation to sales, engineering, design, you name it, in the industry, I mean. And I would like to start the answering of the challenge of Elizabeth a little bit before I prepare something, but I think it's a very valid question. In fact, you can find many definitions, and there's like a spectrum. On one side of the spectrum, you will have analysts and people who say that mobile data is everything that is not voice and starts with text messages. And on the other side, you will find very extreme definitions that talk about 100 megabits per second in the wireless part. I think that it is necessary that we agree as an industry what does it mean, mobile broadband, as you say. But it is also important that the different governments and regulators start doing that exercise. according to every country, because you have different situations that need to be addressed depending on the orography, on the demography, and in the current status of the infrastructure and the challenges that you have ahead of you, meaning what do you want to do with the mobile broadband. One, for instance, if coming back to my colleague from Nokia, from NSN was saying, he talked about voice, data, and he also talked about previously on video. I think that mobile broadband is anything that can help, can support transporting an MPEG-2 transport stream to have a decent streaming video, and that can have a round-trip delay that makes interactivity possible, meaning 70 milliseconds or less. But this is debatable, and we can have the 2 hours here discussing if it is 30 or 70. Is everything all right? Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Guillermo. Are you done?
Yeah, I'm just watching here. Everything is okay. Okay, well, so I wrap it up. I think I'm already making the people sleep, and it's very early. Sorry about that. So, you go.
Thank you very much, Guillermo. We now go to Ralph, I think.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. I must apologize. I have a bad cold that I must have attracted to me when I was in India last week. But quite interesting. This morning, I think there was a reference to the Facebook guy as being the coolest guy the Microsoft person ever met. Well, I personally think I have the coolest job in the world, right? And what I mean by that is, my group focuses on transformation of countries. And what we try to do is bring or have the countries realize the benefits, the social economic benefits that broadband can deliver, right? And we do this in a couple of ways. One with some market-based programs, which which is purely on the private side. So we have programs running in 50 countries to get the next billion or that third billion people on the internet, with devices, and digitally illiterate and accomplishing, starting to reap some of the benefits, both socially and economically. But that doesn't cover the fourth, fifth, and 6 billion. And in that venue, we work with governments, regulators, ICT regulators, telecom regulators, to help them develop some smart infrastructure, smart policies, smart plans, targeted subsidies, along with a vibrant public-private partnership with stakeholder involvement. And those stakeholders also include the people that are going to end up using the services as well, right? We also focus in education is one of our leading tenets, because we believe it's the fundamental requirement in reaching those benefits, as well as changing society, whether it be more women taking more formative roles, becoming more digitally literate, or children, or disabled. Broadband as a platform enables all those capabilities. Just a side note on education, we've probably, with our ecosystem, delivered about, in the tens of millions of PCs worldwide in education transformation programs. Along with that, we've worked with, as the model changes from a teacher-centric model to a student-centric model, we have an initiative called Intel Teach, where we've trained well over 10 million teachers on 21st century skill set to enable that kind of teaching environment. So as I said, we believe that it starts with smart policies and works its way down to the demand side. And if you look at the broadband ecosystem, voice was very simple. or simpler in the sense that it was supply side focused. In broadband, you need both the supply and demand side. And if you look at the broadband ecosystem, you know, the theory is that if you build enough infrastructure out, then more services will be deployed. If there are more services deployed, then more applications will start to crop up. If there are more applications, right, then, excuse me, I apologize, my cold is getting to me. That should create more users, and that users will cycle back and build out more infrastructure, and it looks like a contiguous circle. The problem with that is it does work to a certain extent, but if you're digitally illiterate, it doesn't help you, right? And most countries that have studied the ICT, the areas that have held back ICT deployments has been around digital literacy, right, around the world. So, you know, it's a major area of focus for us. And just one side note example, and then you can give me the red card over there in the back. You know, India is rolling out a major broadband backbone fiber, and one of the things that they've figured out that's great that we put the supply in there, but we have too many people that don't know how to use the technology. So they created a national digital literacy program, which is an initiative that we started working with the India government on. And they set the goals, and the goals being that one person in every household must be illiterate. So they set the barriers. And it's a good example of a public-private partnership where we, along with our partners like Microsoft is involved and many other people that we work with in this ecosystem, and we are delivering the digital literacy training, the content, and all the necessary requirements to support the rollout of their broadband network. Because again, you can roll out the fiber, but if nobody's using it, there's no business. So with that, I'll stop before I get the hook. Thank you, and interested to hear any other questions that you may have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ralph. I think, as you can see, we've got a formidable panel here. The question at hand that we are going to address, I think each one of these ladies and gentlemen will have a good contribution. But allow me to give you some statistics that will, it's a kind of reality check of what tremendous opportunities we have in this sector, what tremendous opportunities we have with ICT. And before I forget, let me acknowledge the source of my statistics, Professor Seka Kondepudi of the National University of Singapore. Now, 50% of our population as we speak lives in cities. By 2050, 70% of the population will live in cities. 80% of emissions of greenhouse gases are generated in cities. That means that it is going to increase if we don't do anything about it. In 2020, we can expect that 50 billion connected devices will be on our planet. We can expect that the transportation sector is going to grow more than any other by 2020. 10,855 liters of water. 10,855 liters of water is how much water you spend over the life cycle of a pair of jeans. 6.6 billion. 6.6 billion is the number of new trees needed to clear carbon dioxide emissions emitted by data centers each year. Each year, 6.6 billion, if we were to eliminate those gases. $46 million is the value of the carbon offset purchases by 20 countries in order to meet emissions reduction targets. That was what was required 5 years ago. More now. Now, I did say we have a tremendous opportunity. These look negative, but what I want us to look at, the optimism I want to develop in all of us, especially in Africa, is that these can be mitigated. We need to mitigate these facts, and this conference has put it to you that building a developing a ubiquitous, secure, and sustainable ICT infrastructure would be a way out for us. Now, I see a hand up. I was going to ask a question, but he needs to ask me a question instead. Okay?
Yeah. Well, those were a lot of numbers. Okay, but I jump into the first ones, and to have, I mean, 50 billion. It's internet-connected devices. Is half of the number of brain cells that a human brain has. No? So that's quite a bit. And that means that the first thing that jumps into my head is affordability for that. I mean, it has to be affordable, and I think that that is the first thing that I would like to put on the table, because the challenge it would be that the mobile broadband service, as we may define it, maybe I propose a definition, but okay, should be comparable in affordability to the voice services in order to have 90-something% of penetration instead of 10.
I think that is exactly the point. That is exactly the point that we need to be addressing now. We need to be looking at what policies would ensure a competitive broadband market and increase the ubiquity of ICT-enabled services. Now, what policies would ensure a competitive broadband market and increase the ubiquity of ICT-enabled services? So, over to you, ladies and gentlemen. I think this August gathering would like to hear from you in answer to this question. Okay, who wants to go first? I'll take the lady first, anytime.
Thank you, Andrew. Back to that question that I asked you a few minutes ago. You can relax. I'm not going to ask you for an answer. But there are two schools of thought that are current. There's the one school of thought that says we should put a figure, a number, and speeds, and categorize networks as broadband. There's another school of thought which I actually I ride with, and that is we're really talking about an ecosystem. We're talking about high capacity, high speed, high quality. We're talking about networks, including the devices that you use on them. We're talking about services, applications, content, and the whole idea is that we should be able to use this to give us the variety, the utility, and the value that, and information that users want. And those users can be anybody. So, Mr. Chairman, if I may start, I just want to talk about these high-capacity quality networks. And specifically, I want to underscore the fact that there is a lot that is sitting in our countries today that would qualify for mobile broadband. And by this, I'd like us to really appreciate that there is no one technology that is going to do this for us. We will have to harness all the technologies that are available that can give us the kind of utility we are looking at. So speaking from a mobile broadband perspective, I just wanted to say that the current third-generation networks that we have available today and their evolution, they still have a runway, and there are policies that we can put in place today that will ensure that we maximize the power of that technology. And just one recommendation I'd make, there are countries in our continent today that don't have a single 3G licensee. We can start right there by appealing to policymakers in countries like those to license out in itself mobile broadband. There are countries that have just the one operator, which means all the spectrum has not been used. So my recommendation first would be to utilize the resources that we have. By the way, there are about 800 networks, 3G networks globally, so we're talking about economies of scale. These networks are capable of up to 42 megabits per second if implemented appropriately. So let's use what we have as one recommendation, even as we discuss later on how we can aspire for the new services, the fourth and fifth and sixth generation services that we may be looking at going forward. Thank you.
But I need to push you on that one. What policies would you suggest that we put in place, or we urge our leadership to put in place, in order to utilize fully what we have and go forward with new ones?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, putting me on the spot. So for countries that do not have 3G services, license them out. For those that don't have competitive 3G services, let's have licensing regimes that encourage competition. For instance, if you just have a monopoly 3G operator, there is no incentive for him to offer services that are appropriate. But perhaps one other thing we can look at is, even where we have third generation 3G services and where we have fairly successful operators who are doing well, we find that the services are not rolling to the rural areas. There's a role for policy there to get our service providers to serve the masses in the rural areas.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm sure there are some regulators out there that will respond to your challenge. Let's have another contribution. I think, Noel, you had something to say.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. I very much concur with what Elizabeth was saying. And if we go back to one of the sessions we had this morning where this internet.org was referred to, and internet.org actually has both David from Ericsson and Elizabeth from Qualcomm also as key founding members, such as you have with Nokia as well, supporting the same initiative, and Facebook and many other leaders of the industry. I think what that's trying to do is connect the unconnected. We talked about the difference between voice and data. So it's really connect the unconnected from a data point of view, get them onto the internet. And I think one of the key points, and following on from what Elizabeth said, one of the key fundamental drives of that, as we start to look into the details of how we're going to do that, is to squeeze as much as we can out of existing technologies. So it's how much compression can we put into our existing 2G technologies? What can we do with our 3G technologies? Yes, the 4G technologies will come. And I just want to put, again, we use too many acronyms, but it's interesting to note that when we talk about the LTE, as you heard for quite a lot yesterday, we shouldn't be selling technology. The LTE actually stands for long-term evolution. But I think if we back it off from this panel, let's just think about it in different terms. Let's think about it as a technology that delivers the best latency, the best throughput, and the best end-user experience. Now, that could be put against a number of different technologies, but that is where we're headed to. That is the ultimate, because if you can deliver a good latency, if you can give a good throughput, if you can control an end-user experience, it can enable things like entertainment. It can enable things like e-education, e-learning, e-health, e-agriculture, I'd like to add in from the comments yesterday, and entrepreneurship. And one of the points we're trying to struggle with as an industry, what we've done effectively, when we were selling voice, it was a case of build it and they will come. And pretty much as an industry, that's what we did from the fixed and to the early mobile services. When we start to talk about mobile broadband, one of the key lessons we've learned from many of the successful operators around the world is you need to build it out, and they will come. And for that, we need to get those lower spectrum bands, the digital dividend bands that's been referred to yesterday and today. And I think the key point, and maybe coming back to the smart cities and the centralization of cities, why are people coming to these cities? Are they coming to their cities for jobs? Are they coming for their cities for education? Are they coming for broadband availability? If we build it out, empower people to have the similar, we saw 90 megabits per second on stage. If we get that built out, would that offset what Andrew was referring to by 50 to 70% of people coming into the urban centres? Put them into their communities, leave them with their families, leave them in a much more productive area, allow that entrepreneurship to have the same quality of services and access to the mobile broadband as they have in the main cities. And it's interesting, again, some of the references we've seen where some of these latest networks have been rolled out, they don't necessarily, the highest traffic doesn't necessarily come from the city. Often the traffic is coming from underserved areas. Now that is very, very relevant. Underserved doesn't necessarily mean rural. There are many, many communities in Africa that are underserved but aren't necessarily in rural. So these are the type of areas. Let's use technology to look at the global planning processes we have, as well as some of the challenges that we talked about, the concentration of people in certain areas, rather than having them being beneficial and efficient and entrepreneurial in their communities, wherever they be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that is very insightful. If we could get what we have in the cities, get it all over the country, would that curtail this tremendous that I talked about earlier? I also wonder, and I just want to provoke you for a later comment, whether the finances or business plans come into the issue that you are discussing of utilizing what you have before you go to the next one. Because I'll submit to you that sometimes it is more expensive to maintain what you have to get return on investment than to go to a new one. But again, that's just to provoke you for a further comment.
Give a shot.
Okay, House.
Sure. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Was it somebody else?
The lady.
Go ahead. You go first.
So I think your statistics were actually really interesting, and it brings into my mind a question of, again, looking at the reality of where we are right now and the policies we have in place right now, looking at coverage expectations and quality of service. And we are seeing that many regulators and governments, rightfully so, are expecting national coverage. And globally we have 1.6 billion mobile broadband connections. So that takes into account CDMA and those in the GSM family. And when you look at it, those connections, to make them possible, takes a tremendous amount of investment. So I think we really need to start thinking about not just the policies themselves, but the framework and the scope of the policies. And if we have a short-term vision and we're trying to get immediate regulatory or political wins, this is not going to incentivize operators or manufacturers to roll out networks on a large scale. It's going to de-incentivize them because they won't have the regulatory certainty. You wouldn't buy a house without knowing that you'd be able to stay in it for a few years. It's the same kind of principle. So I think before we can start listing specific policies, we need to look at what is the context we're working in, and if we're expecting tremendous investment in the mobile industry and the mobile broadband industry, then how do we ensure that that's a regulatory environment that is predictable, that's clear, that's transparent, and that incentivizes companies to invest in the first place? And the second point was on the coverage issue. I think we can do a lot of work in understanding what frequencies we're working with here, and understanding the kind of compromises or kind of best options in terms of coverage versus quality of service and affordability. And broadcasting in the higher frequencies is notoriously much more expensive than in the lower frequency bands. So looking at, again, the digital dividend, and I don't want to keep harping on about it, but it's much more expensive. You know, it's I think to roll a 700 megahertz network out is 30% of the cost of rolling one out in 2.1. And when you look at it that way, it's clear why we can probably get more coverage at a better price, which will then be, hopefully in the end, passed on to the consumer, which at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to reach. So I think looking at long-term regulatory certainty and understanding the propagation characteristics of the frequencies that we're trying to work with, we really can formulate some good policies, but they have to be on a long-term perspective.
Excellent. Predictability of the regulatory environment is, I think, something that most of us would agree with. I also agree that smart infrastructure, one definition should be efficiency. And if you are telling us that transmitting in a particular set of frequencies is more efficient, then certainly it should be looked at. But I'm sure somebody will comment on that. It's not my job. Guillermo, I see you have something.
Yes. I would like to start framing a little bit more the discussion. To have the proliferation of the mobile broadband similar to voice penetration and make it available and affordable for the people of the different countries. We are talking about making that the expense in mobile broadband should be similar to what the people is paying today for voice. And this in some countries could be a factor of 5 or 10 times. That's why we have 90% mobile cellular penetration and 10% mobile broadband penetration. It's a matter of affordability. And reducing the price, the end user price by a factor, by an order of magnitude, implies that you need to reduce the cost by a factor maybe of 20. And that is a huge problem. That is a huge challenge that requires a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation and a lot of efficiencies. And then we have better frequencies. I fully agree that the digital dividend is the way to go, fully endorsed. We need more bandwidth. So we can foresee 3 times more with usage of bandwidth in most of the countries. And we will need more efficient technologies. And if you are factors like these, and also as sharing infrastructure, especially the passive infrastructure, you make some math. For instance, you can share 2 networks or two passive infrastructure, having 4 times less sites, having 3 times more spectrum, and then you can go to a factor of 15 or 18, and you are close to the gap. But this implies collaboration to make that happen, and that collaboration can be put in the frame of PPP. That's why in Alcatel-Lucent we fully endorse what is happening here in Rwanda on the PPP for the mobile broadband in the country, and we see that happening in other countries. I'm Mexican, and we are looking into the same possibilities, and it is, in fact, the predictability factor is really important because we had to went all the way up to change the constitution to make it a right of all the Mexican citizens, the right to broadband. And that will give, time and certain on the purpose of the policy, and it is driving the secondary laws that are underway. But this is a tremendous challenge, to have mobile broadband proliferation, to have the penetration increase. This famous figure of 10% more penetration gives you around 1% GDP. When you want to have 10% more penetration, you have to probably reduce the price 20%.
Thank you, Game. David, you have something?
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. I think on the issue of smart infrastructure, we do know that over the last 10 or so years, the infrastructure that is in place, the investment has come mainly from private sector, but also from public sector, especially with the policies around getting the undersea cable, especially into East Africa. And going forward, we still see that the private sector is going to play a very important role, especially the operators that we all use, that is the service providers that we all use. But for them to do this, as some of my colleagues have said, they need to have continuous, good environment for them to be able to pull in more money and invest in the infrastructure. So in certain, there are 5 key things, or 4 or 5 key things that we think as Ericsson, that regulators and public sector stakeholders or policymakers need to focus on to be able to assist our operators, because we all use these operators, to be able to encourage them to invest to the next level. A key thing is a technology-neutral environment. In certain areas in Africa, you still have countries where providers can move from one technology to another without a very laborious administration legal process. We should allow our operators to operate in a light-touch environment that allows them to move from one technology to the other to be able to offer services to the citizens. So that is very key. A good number of countries in East Africa are already technology neutral, Rwanda being one of them, but certain areas in Africa are not. The second area is we need to systemize and incentivize innovation. We've all talked about innovation, so that end users and developers can be able to develop those applications that will allow data growth and profitable data growth. So putting in an environment that has a systematic and incentives for innovators is very key. Spectrum is an important thing, and it's belabored because it's a very key factor. Digital dividend is a very key factor. When, as you said, more people move into, for example, Kigali, from X amount of number of people to quadruple the number of people, operators will need to invest more. But for them to invest more, they need the right spectrum for those, so that they can be able to service dense areas. And in the rural areas, as you've had, they need good spectrum to be able to serve those areas profitably and at a manageable cost. So spectrum allocation is also very key. Fourthly, which is also important, is infrastructure sharing. I know in Africa we have talked a lot about this. Certain African countries are doing better than others, but we need to continuously encourage infrastructure sharing so that we can pool resources and be able to deliver good backhaul services for the operators and be able to get in all these data pipes that are coming in. So sharing of infrastructure is important. And if we do all this, create this atmosphere, we won't have any shortage of investment, because someone has to pay for this smart infrastructure to come into our countries. It's not going to be free. The public policymakers need to move faster so that we can be able to get this digital dividend, to allow the operators to invest and serve us and get the benefits. So those 4 or 5 key areas, what we call digital agenda, is very important to transform Africa. One of my dreams is in the next Transform Africa summit, hopefully in Kigali, is we should, at least for those people in East Africa, we should all be able to travel here and not always look for Wi-Fi connection to be able to connect to the internet. Everybody's afraid of what the costs, of data when you're out of the country. Hopefully, once the environment is created that allows our operators to be able to invest more, where taxes, there needs to be a balance between getting taxes so that you invest and give services to the public, vis-a-vis allowing the operators to be more innovative, to lower costs, so that when we travel, you're not always looking for a hotspot to be able to connect. So that's very key.
Excellent points. I feel confident that GSMA being here and a number of regulators in the audience, the issue of the right pricing, the right taxation, the right technologies, the right frequencies to be used for the right provision of service, those are issues that will make for smart infrastructure. Smart infrastructure doesn't have to be something new. It has to be used in a smart way, in an efficient way, in a way that will reach the people that need it most, and not go holding up your phone to look for signal. I need to move on to the next issue, but quick one. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. A very quick one, just to close that off. I think all of us have referred to the digital dividend, but there's just one small detail. There will be no digital dividend unless we migrate analog television to digital TV. So I think a really practical policy recommendation that we could make is that we as a continent follow through on the digital migration programs and processes that we are talking about, and be sure to meet the deadline for migration, because if we don't do that, the digital dividend is really an academic discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm very happy to inform you that the ITU is working very hard with member states to meet this deadline in 2015, and I'm confident that we'll meet that deadline. Okay, I need to move on, if you allow me.
Let's move on.
A couple more statistics. Today, each day, the world creates 2.5, I can't even pronounce the word, 2.5 quintillion, that's 18 zeros, bytes of data every single day. And 90% of that data today has been created in the last 2 years, 2011 and 2012. In the 11 years between 2009 and 2020, the size of the digital universe will increase 44-fold. That's 41% increase in capacity every year. Only 5% of this data created is structured. The 95% is largely unstructured. Where is the source of this data? Social media posts, pictures posted, videos, sensors, transactions, GPS data. This is where we are. We are really in the future. We need to have smart infrastructure. We need to handle the infrastructure that we have in a smart way, even if we don't build new infrastructure. Now, the statistics would seem to suggest that we have lots of data. My question is, do we have enough relevant data? And if not, how can we facilitate content development, application development, and the creation of new products and services using cloud computing platforms? This word has been flying around. It is becoming popular. Some people know what it means, others don't. But I'm going to ask the panel to react to this question. Given the statistics that I've just given you, do we have enough relevant data? And if not, how can we facilitate content development, application development, and the creation of new products and services using cloud computing platforms, assuming that that is a smart technology to use. Let me start from here this time.
Thank you very much, and for those statistics which actually telling us that, well, we are producing those data. And your question is relevant when you actually apply this to Africa. We even believe that there is still margin for Africa because we are not really producing some of those things. If you disaggregate, those, information you are providing to us, how much of this data is being produced from Africa, actually. So we still have room for that. Now, how do you produce this? Some of the thing we are saying is that today we just have this debate on broadband and which type of technology we should be using. We do believe that now is the time for Africa to really think about data creation. And on that, I will also say that we are overwhelmed by this data we are having today. But yet, we need to really think about why are we using all of this. I think it's about opportunity we are creating. It's about, what we say, growth, generation, accomplishment, self-fulfillment. So I do believe that we need to work on that. Let me give you an example, talking of data. If you want to know today how many domain names, because I'm working on them, how many domain names, registered we do have today in Africa, we don't know. Because we don't have those statistics anywhere, and some of the countries that are well organized, they do have those statistics, but when it comes to Africa generally, it's always an issue. So we really need to organize those statistics, locally and regionally as well. But I do believe that we now need some incentives to have those data that we really need. And this morning I was assisting to some of those panels, and it was quite important that we get into areas such as e-government, for instance. We need to provide better services to citizens. There are ways in which you do those things. There are norms. Are we really applying those norms? And those norms mean that you are having the right format for producing those things and also for disseminating them. But then the whole issue of archiving those things, and that's where the cloud computing thing happened. And definitely in Africa, I do believe that we should go this way. Now the incentives for me, there are too many issues surrounding this incentive we have to create so that the data is really relevant to us in Africa. So I mentioned e-government, for instance. How do we have different ministry line work together, share those information? How do we know that the information is relevant? And those big data we are having today also, there are issues about security of those issues. How secure are we? And also in terms of actually the issue now going to come also is the personal identity, personal data. How do you deal with those things? It's good. I think that it's going to happen with so many different way of doing business, and there are issues that we need to consider. Cryptography, for instance, in some of the countries, the trust that we need to create. So we need to have, at least on country level, appropriate mechanism to actually deal with those issues. So what I would actually like to say, Moderator, is that we do have data, but I still think that we don't have enough relevant for, let's take a social economic development in Africa. But this comes with some other different things that we need to put in place. Yeah.
I got a new definition. Smart infrastructure needs to collect and keep statistics, so we don't keep relying on other people's statistics. Guillermo, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, interesting statistics. You mentioned 2020, just 7 years from now. But I think it's too short for planning, given the size of the challenge. I think that we need to look if we are talking about this huge amount of investment, these large projects, and we're talking about critical national infrastructure here, we have to look into 20 years, 30 years. We have to have the courage to look really long-term. And that is a different ballgame, because then you can think about coverage, you can think about not focusing on a particular technology, but in 20 years we will have another G or 2Gs, or meaning generations, technology. I always believe that. I do not believe, in Malthusian scenarios that we will have catastrophic scenarios. I always believe that the inventive of human beings is great, and we should look into the future with confidence and look into 2 decades, 3 decades, and plan critical national infrastructure with a national interest in a long-term plan, and that will give us certainty, but it will also mitigate one of the main challenges of our industry, which is the market risk. Is this going to be really the money? I mean, yesterday the gentleman from Katie said we will need money to do this, and money. There's plenty of people wanted to do long-term investments and to enter into this into this industry, but they will need some mitigation for the market risk, for the demand risk, and that implies having national programs on education, on health, on security, public, and national minimum consumption that can be planned in a number of years, but also not only public, also private, hospitals and entrepreneurs, integrators, enterprises that speak out and said, yes, we depend on technology and connectivity, and we sign a letter of intent for the next 5 years, and that will mitigate the market risk and make the long-term business plans possible. And that's a very critical thing that I wanted to put into the table, because at the end we will need to talk about who is going to pay for the infrastructure, and the money will come, but they will need some certain security, certain guarantees, certain mitigation of the risk, and that's something that all the industry has to work on.
Thank you very much. He didn't say the words, but my mind picks up the issue of planning, national planning. National broadband plans and policies are, I think, very important if we are going to get investments that need to go into this building of smart infrastructure. I think somebody else mentioned the issue of security. I want to hold that. I'm going to bring it up next. So let me go to Corey. Do you have? Ralph, did you have something?
Yeah, okay. I think you can separate cloud and content development, and while I do believe in cloud services, I don't think that's the first priority here. I think the first priority is to be able to get people to develop content, develop business models for content. And there are many issues around that, the content management, privacy laws that have to be put in place from a policy perspective, right? And get the developer community up and running. And you can deploy content today in a very simple way and generate a business model that creates employment locally as well, right? As well as develops local content. So, again, I do believe in cloud services. I think it's important that we get there. I think until we get LTE rolled out, cloud services might be not as fruitful as we all think. And that comes back to the definition of broadband, which, sorry, I'm going to take a crack at. We used to define broadband in terms of speeds and feeds. You know, it had to be 2 megabits, whatever, and certain quality of service. And we've backed away from that and defined it differently. And we defined it more as whatever speed is required to deliver the quality of service and the experience that application or user or segment needs. So if you're a hospital and you in a medical community and you want to transfer a X-ray to a doctor, a 256 kilobit line is not an acceptable user experience. You know, it may take them hours to get that, and the patient could die by that time. If you are rolling out broadband to the underserved and you are, you know, in a new area where digital literacy is very low, it doesn't make sense to put maybe a 50 gigabit line back there, right? I'm using the extreme just as an example. So you need to balance that to user experience that's acceptable for the services that are being supplied and not get overly hung up on the speed. But you should have a long-range plan so that, you know, maybe for the, in certain underserved areas, you're going to deliver 20 megabits, as an example. But deliver it in a time-based fashion. So by the year 2017, I'm going to deliver, you know, put time-bound goals around it. I'm going to deliver 20 megabits to this area, and by 2025, or 2020, that's going to go to 40 megabits, right? So have a long-range strategy and a long-range plan in your deployment of broadband. And like I said again, I think the cloud applications and services will evolve once the broadband platform becomes much more prevalent, but it doesn't hinder the development of local content and local services that can be deployed today on the current technology, because again, this technology is all evolutional, so the application and services can ride the technology over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ralph, I'm hoping that somebody in the audience will disagree with you, so that I'm provocative here.
Did I say something wrong or something?
No. When we talk about leapfrogging, and we talk about dreaming, we are asking our kids to think outside the box and not be like ourselves. I don't see any problem with Kigali, for example, using the facilities of cloud computing. I would be appalled if a kid in Kibuye who doesn't have the computing power on the laptop that they have, and the power sits in Kigali, I would be appalled if anybody said, you know, you can start where you are and develop a little content. You know, we are asking people to dream. Let's not stand in their way. And as I said, I'm just being provocative here, but let me ask David. David put up his hand.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I think from a content perspective, the stage is set for African developers to build local content and local applications that hopefully African users would buy. Governments are now adopting open data platforms, and one of the key drivers of that is to allow developers to use that government data to create locally relevant applications that will pool that government data, because a lot of government data right now is closed. But as they develop and adopt open data platforms, and that will be very, very useful. It will offer an impetus. Second, a lot of stakeholders in very many cities in Africa that are now offering incubation centers. So unlike before, where developer didn't know where to sit, get internet bandwidth, a good environment to program, and etc., that is now there. Whether it is cloud or on-premise, it is available. So you have the M Labs, the iHubs, and you have the key environments created by organizations like Demo Africa that just ended last week that are offering those people the environments to be able to take the applications forward. So I think the challenge is on two fronts. One, the developers to develop relevant local content, and two, for us as Africans to be able to buy them. I would challenge anyone here who has bought probably 10 local relevant or regional African applications and has paid for it. Very few. I have only bought one that I've been using the last 3 years. So very, very few applications are relevant. But I think the stage is set, and it's now up to the developers to develop good applications that will go viral and that will be purchased with the existing mobile money systems, etc.
I will not disagree on that one.
Andrew, thank you. Yes, just a couple of points on the various issues that have been brought up. I think as an industry, we need to sort of take a look at ourselves as well as look to help from others. I think one of the key areas, we talked about big data. I think we need to think about right data. We need to see about what is the value that we can extract from this massive amount of data. I just saw some studies last night where in the past 3 years, around the world, we've gone from 200 petabytes to 1,600 petabytes. And this is talking about this tsunami of data that's ever increasing. But it's all about the right data. And I want to talk about value. So I think if we talk about services, we have voice-based services, which I think is an intuitive service. We all speak different languages, obviously. Voice is an intuitive service. I would argue, is data an intuitive service? But I think the next service, which is video, is an intuitive service. And I want to come back to what we said earlier. 1 gigabyte of data. If we break that down, 0.4% of that 1 gigabyte will be our traditional voice and texting. 99.6% will be everything else. It's video, it's browsing, it's all of the things we do. And that is one of the biggest challenges we have. And that, what we have to change as an industry, we have to move away from minutes and think about bytes. Already this has been implemented in some markets where rather than holding on to voice and texting minutes, we move to a bucket of data. And that is scalable on an affordability basis. And that is where we're starting to shift the fundamental industry. And it's only a case of how much of those buckets of data, and then we get into the social impacts of how we can get it to encourage people to join into that system. So I think that's one area. And the other point I want to talk about is when we talk about customer experience management, we need to talk about how we actually engage with, we talk about a personal experience, the experience that we're willing to pay for. And if you look at, we talked about that voice, data, and video, what is it that you actually pay for? Because actually when you look at your entertainment as opposed to your mobile broadband and your voice, often what we're paying from our own wallet is that form of video, that entertainment. But again, there's a whole host of other services that can be opened up. So let me come back and complete a sentence I said earlier. Build it out, let them use it, get it into people's hands, and they will come and they will pay. Now, who is they? Right now, and as an industry, we've only ever looked at one form of payment, which is downstream, which is from the end subscriber. When we talk about some of these other issues, the one thing we haven't talked about in this panel, the challenges we face, is the internet players. The internet players who are driving this 99.6% of this content, they also have a role to play in this conversation. So as an industry, we need to think very carefully how we do that. And one of the things that certainly NSN have been looking at is we talk about localization of services, liquid applications. And what that basically means is we take the content to the edge of the network. We take it into the community. We take it into the individual areas. And we encourage local content, the internet players, international and local, to encourage to load content onto the local cities, local regions, local areas, in whatever language it may be. This is where we're starting to flatten. And we go from a dumb pipe to a smart pipe. We talk about smart infrastructure. This is where we're referring to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will have to cut you short so that we go to the next one, but I'll give you just 1 minute, and then we go to the next one, and then we can open.
I won't even take that long, Mr. Moderator. Can I just see by a show of hands who of us here is a content developer? We have two, or we have a few, yet we are talking about how can we get our continent to develop local content. I think what I'd like to illustrate is that this is a big deal. It is something that I believe needs to be discussed in each country. It's going to take some effort, and it needs an all-inclusive consultative process, perhaps in country, that involves the very software developers that we're talking about. let's hear from them what it will take for them to develop the local content that we so continually talk about. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I have to jump. Otherwise, I will give it in my buffer very quickly.
Okay.
If we are talking about 30 times more bandwidth, as was mentioned before, that means that we will need to do 60 times faster the applications. We will need to have the right environment for the developers to try and fail, to exercise, to have more agile application development and attract more people. And to attract more people, I propose something. Besides looking into the downstream thing, the commercial selling of the application as only model, here yesterday, the leader said that it has to be used for agriculture and for all the different sectors. All the different sectors have KPIs who are relevant for the countries and for the continent. And the development bank says that they want to collaborate on this. So if somebody comes with an application that can help one KPI that is relevant for a certain country or the continent, he deserves money from the development banks, and he deserves support, and it's not only doing games and things like that.
Thank you very much. Let me tell you that the regulatory community in Africa is actually looking at how to better utilize even universal access funds. Before, we did not, or regulators did not have any definitions of broadband within their universal access definitions. ITU has developed guidelines that regulators can use in including broadband within the universal service definitions. Now, I need to move on because we do have another issue. As we build smart infrastructure for smart cities, for a smart Africa, I know we are all aware of this revolution that is taking place in broadband. We are all aware of how many submarine cables have landed on our shores in the last even 5 years. We are all aware that all too often we open up and we are left gaping for those that are aware to come and pick whatever they want. Security of personal information and the absolute right to privacy is on everybody's mind, especially since the recent alleged scandal of countries conducting surveillance on its citizens and those of other countries. Only this morning, I was informed that a UN resolution on internet privacy may come through the General Assembly through the third committee as early as today or tomorrow. As we develop ubiquitous, secure, and sustainable ICT infrastructure, how can we create a safe environment to support electronic transactions, protect personal privacy, and all the other issues that you and I are concerned with, and build confidence in ICT services? I knew ICANN was going to come first. We need to be quick so that we allow the audience to interact.
Okay, thank you very much. And this is quite important, question. And in fact, the recent IGF, which is the Internet Governance Forum, that happened. Finally, most of the debates were around this issue of surveillance, but also this issue of private identity and the whole issue of security, as you just put it here. I just want to say that, okay, the first thing that we knew that those things were happening anyway. What we might not know is that In fact, some country might be, preaching kind of, way of maintaining human rights, all of those things, and then, but yet they are doing those things. What I just want to say is that, and you said it, internet is today pervasive, and you can't avoid it anyway. What is happening, and the threats have always been there, and those who are techies know that we've been dealing with, combating threats on the net for so many years anyway. So, and there are mechanisms that are in place actually to secure, the internet. In fact, what you say, to secure the DNS. I'll be talking on this thing tomorrow, for instance. But what these events, are showing us, telling us, is that it has to be what I might call a multi-stakeholder thing. It's not just about government. It's also about the end users. Professionals are doing whatever they can do to secure those things. What is happening today is that since this thing is pervasive, this security should become at home. How are we securing usage of this internet in our own, home base? What attitude are we, having vis-a-vis this thing? I think it's important. So what is called is a kind of wake-up. It's a wake-up call to all of us that we need to have on national level, on regional level, this sort of debate. Because what is happening here is, what is the balance you strike, between security and your, private, identity, all of those things. I mean, and it has to be. For instance, when we used to, you pass the borders and then you go through those security checks, all of those things, you got a right. In most places, you got a right to actually go back to search this information they are taking from you. But how many citizens know about those things, for instance? So I'm saying the responsibility now lies on all of us, at different level anyway. For instance, Interpol is doing a great job now today on cybersecurity. But we as individuals also, we have to do something about it. So it's a kind of, global.
Thank you very much. You? Okay. I have one more and then we'll open up.
Yeah, just a quick one. The point of security is very broad, and it's a matter of mindset and trust. In fact, there are many standards and norms. I can easily think of tens of different standards that are published, but it's a contradiction because then they become published, so everybody knows the security standards. So that's one area of opportunity that we have. The second area of opportunity is all these procedures and certifications that are coming up in the world. There are a number of procedures and certifications that need to become practice of the industry. And you have different philosophies for that. I mean, practices and certifications for terminals and applications, but also for networks and their operations and the people who operate them. Maybe a simple analogy is like, do you trust your chauffeur? There's a taxi, and there might be a mic in the taxi, and you can trust or not, or more or less, your driver. And the driver, anyway, is going to know where you are going and why you're talking in the car. So it's a matter of certifications, procedures, good practices that is also needed to be worked on as an industry. And there are some very good initiatives on that.
Thank you. There's a saying from Uganda that says, Rubere mbera nembirokota de. I agree with you. I agree with you. There are procedures, there are policies, and you have talked about trust. You can trust as much as you want, unless your door is closed tight. That trust doesn't mean anything. My point is that we need to be prepared as we build smart, sustainable infrastructure. We need to make sure that this infrastructure is locked, this infrastructure is watched, so that in the event that anybody tries to come through the door, you are aware and you can pick them up. We do have efforts around that. There are now, I think, in Africa, quite a few computer incident response teams that we are building. We have ITU Impact that helps member states manage their doorways. So I think that the awareness, the education and awareness point that PA brought about, if you personally are not aware of your security, nobody's going to be aware for you. You need to be aware of what can come in and how you can stop it. Yes, we can provide help, but you need to be aware. Now, I do need to open up to you. We've had the discussions, and you, sir, you put up your hand first, and then you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think I'm quite fortunate this session, because the last two sessions I wasn't quite fortunate. Permit me to respond. Really, it has been a thought-provoking panel and very informative. The first takeaway for me is that we need to start with a very smart policy framework, very smart policy. And this policy has to be built by using the multi-stakeholder model that Pierre talked about, a multi-stakeholder model that involve the government, the private sector, the civil society, the academia, the technical community, and all stakeholders you could identify. In fact, this also implies when we're talking about smart education, we want to bridge the gaps in e-skills. There has to be a smart e-skills framework for a nation. Every nation should have a smart e-skills framework that should be built through the multi-stakeholder model. Well, we need to move beyond leapfrogging. We need to cheetah pole vault. Cheetah is the fastest animal, and pole vault sport. So cheetah pole vault that is moving beyond even the normal expectation. And I believe with smart infrastructure, we can get that going. In Lagos, in Nigeria, for example, we have more than 20 terabits of the bandwidth sitting at the coast, and they need to move in. So there's need to come up with the broadband plan, which you mentioned, Andrew. And really, the government in Nigeria, for example, has developed not only the smart ICT policy, but also a broadband plan to bring this to the last mile. So we need to get it to the last mile, and it will be used, definitely. You know about the Nollywood video, as Noel talked about, video entertainment will drive it. So the demand is there, and it's just for it to be provided. And then talking about measuring, well, Elizabeth was talking about maybe we might not really need to talk into figures or measurement, but I think we need to, at different time, measure to know what is the measure of broadband we're using to people, how many people are involved, or the penetration level. We know the base standard is about 256 kbps per second, but where are we now? And then allow me to also talk about what will enable
I would like to ask you to really cut so that we allow
our round of
we'll come back to you if we get that. I asked that gentleman over there.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Our core capability is in information security, and we weave security into the data itself. But I want to talk about the strategy of content development from the standpoint where most of us in the U.S. are focused on usefulness or the usefulness of existing content and trying to wring good information out of what currently exists. So if you focus on content development and continuing the gathering of data, I think it's a little short-sighted because there's more content than we can currently analyze. Maybe a better strategy might be to focus on applications that can deliver content, also platforms that can deliver content, and then finding the gap that exists between content that is currently available and content that needs to be developed locally.
Thank you very much. I think that's an excellent comment. My comment back to you would be probably we did miss a step because this being Transform Africa, we should have said contextualized content, culturalized content, localized content. We do have huge masses of content, but we want content in a language one can understand, that suits the context where you are, that suits the culture that you treasure. And I think that's what we missed, and I apologize for that. Gentleman over here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I was listening to the very important discussion, I would like to very briefly introduce what is currently discussed at ITUT standardization regarding broadband infrastructure. My name is Haru Okamura from Japan, and I have been working at ITUT study groups of optical networks and also TSAG, both as a vice chairman, in the last 12 years as an expert of high-speed transmission technologies. And it is my just comment is about innovative optical cable for broadband backhaul infrastructure that supports the high-speed use of internet devices, including 4G and LTE mobile devices at rural areas in developing countries. Now, what is currently being discussed at ITUT is an innovative optical cable solution that connects between cities and rural areas as a backhaul solution to support 4G and LTE smartphones at rural areas at a dramatically lower cost than microwave solutions, and its construction time duration is dramatically shorter than microwave solution. The solution is constructed just by local people only after brief video training and thus parallel implementation at multiple places over the entire country is possible. And thus e-health and e-education, for example, could be implemented very quickly at a low cost. The proposed optical cable is based on submarine cable technologies or undersea cable technologies. That cable is thin, very thin. Diameter of that cable is 8 millimeter, thinner than my little finger. Thus lightweight, heavy duty that protects up to 24 fibers with a welded stainless steel pipe. The one cable is capable of transmitting 12 terabit per second data if you wish. That's too much. The cable is waterproof, rodent-proof against bites of monkey, mice, rats, woodpeckers, etc., and highly durable against lateral pressure, even fire-resistant.
Okay. I think that is extremely interesting. What I would like is your contact.
Okay.
What I would like, because we can't go into the product, but I would like everybody here to know who you are and what you have to offer so that after here, they will come to you. And because we are talking about cutting cost, we are talking about efficiency. If that is what you are really offering, I think people would be interested in talking to you.
Yeah, this is being discussed at ITUT, but my contact is okamura@globalplan.jp.
Go to him and find out. Go to him and find out.
Thank you.
You had a point.
Thank you. My name is Mohammed Shafiq. I am from Nokia Solutions. I just put this question for myself, how we can transform the Africa into a smart Africa. So we need to look onto the technology, what technology can help, how technology can help in Africa to be a smart Africa, like e-health, e-learning, and all those things. We need to build these applications and bring all these applications onto cloud and take it to all the rural areas and all parts of the corner of the Africa. Then if we are successful, then the Africa will become a smart Africa.
I think you just supported this part of what they were saying. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll come back to you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I have 3 questions.
Your name?
My name is Nyandu Alphonse. I have 2 questions and 1 contribution.
You, unless you are very quick.
Okay. The first concern is about fast-changing technology. We are talking about building smart infrastructure, but when it comes to the way technology is changing, my question is how governments or ITU can help to formulate policies that protect or facilitate private sector to get return on the investments. Because we may invest in 1 year, after 2 years the technology have changed, then you have to.
Okay, next question.
That's the second question is about the content. It has been mentioned that only 6% of global content is, Africa have only 6% of global content. But when you look at the infrastructures for data all around in Africa, you see that there are so many. I mean the data centers and related infrastructures. So I was wondering, are the infrastructures underutilized or the contents are not shared? So it means also it comes to the policy issue. How can we, governments or ITU, facilitate to have a good policy to stimulate or to promote data sharing or content sharing?
Thank you. I want to go back to this gentleman and then you.
Okay, thank you. So I will conclude quickly now.
Quick.
Well, with regard to sustainability, we could have an ICT fund, ICT development funds, maybe a percentage of the profits of companies that could help to build a rollout. And then finally, there needs to be a law, cybersecurity law, that will assure confidence, that will assure confidence in business, doing business, a payment system and what have you. And my name is James Nolufuye. I'm the chair of the Africa ICT Alliance. It's a private sector-led ICT alliance for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent points. I don't know whether what you are suggesting is different from the Universal Access Fund that different countries have?
Yes, the Universal Service Provision Fund is actually from the telecom sector. But for example, in Nigeria, we have a development agency that also has some percentage of resources for development purposes.
Thank you. Roger, quickly.
Thank you, Andrew. I have just a very quick comment that we have been asked to dream for Africa, to transform it. I feel that we are, during the discussion, that we are trying to limit the dreams and then just to wake up, say that we can't do it, we can't make it. And I'm worried that we're out of the way. But I get the message that we need to be, to understand where we are heading and how we are going to proceed. But in fact, what I'm saying, look at the content or relevance of content. I think we all agree that we are going to use the youth and empower the youth. They are very creative. They will pump up the content, develop it. What will happen, the relevance of the data, the usability, will determine the cost and the generate income. So there is 2 steps. One is how to build the industry as a sector itself, like my colleague said, entertainment, which will generate a demand of bandwidth, or some applications that are relevant and that we cannot afford to not use, like money transfer or voice. That will come and we have no choice. So let's dream big and encourage you young people to generate applications that are relevant, are usable, that we cannot avoid. So in doing so, we'll increase the content. And before I conclude, I like the model that was contracted by KT for the fourth generation, they did not only build and try to build the infrastructure, but they also create another company to build the content, to train people, and this is a good model that we going forward. I don't know if this is the right forum for the second question.
No,
okay.
Thank you. I think you made very, very important points, and I think we note them because this is what we've been saying. This is what our leaders said yesterday. Absolutely, we shouldn't limit ourselves. I haven't heard anything from this side. Where? You want seconds before people have firsts, eh? All right. And then we'll ask, which one?
I'll be very,
okay. Yeah.
I'll be very quick. And I just want to make a comment about security. One of the things to be aware of is that the keys are the most fragile part of any kind of security system, and PKI doesn't scale, which is another challenge to be considered. And when it comes to broadband and 802.11, with basic technologies can be downloaded free over the internet, all of your data, usernames, and passwords are currently exposed.
Thank you. I think that's exactly our point. You at the back, please. After this, you have 1 minute to wrap up.
Mine is just a very brief intervention to say that as we seek to transform Africa, we must remember the statistic that the majority of the Africans, 70% or not, are actually rural folk. And when we sit and have these discussions, sometimes we forget that they do have a right to be here, to say whether they want their lives transformed, in what ways they want their lives transformed, and by who. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us. There's a lady here. Did you put your hand up? Okay, can you make a quick one?
Yes, thank you. My name is Sofia Bekele. I'm originally from Ethiopia. I'm also the CEO of .Connect Africa Registry Systems based in Kenya. I wish I had made this statement yesterday, but I didn't get a chance to. Thank you, Mr. Rugege, for giving us the opportunity to intervene. I was part of the 2007 Connect Africa Summit when the goal was set for transforming Africa at that time, or connecting Africa. And we have had an initiative. I just want to update everyone on the initiative that we had then. Our organization is called .Connect Africa, and in 2007 we introduced it as a very important project to the Connect Africa Summit, and we had committed $100,000 to commitments to the initiative, and it's still hanging on the website of ITU Connect Africa Summit. At this time, 6 years later, we have raised $1.2 million to support the effort. And this is the .Africa initiative, which is branding Africa, your online identity, instead of people using .com, .org, to put a .Africa top-level domain name. And we have spent this much effort and monies on it, as well as we've gotten credit. We had a Yes to .Africa campaign, which we have traveled all over Africa to create advocacy and an awareness of the benefits of it. And I wish we had had an opportunity to highlight African-based organizations that had commitment during the Connect Africa Summit, and then has actually championed something during the last 6 years, and have had the opportunity to speak yesterday in front of the excellencies. But we didn't, and I put this for the record.
Can you help us understand how this initiative would help in what we are discussing right now?
It's infrastructure.
Yes, that's what I want you to get to, because we don't have much time. I want you to get to that point.
Well, basically, domain names are part of infrastructure, technology, and the .africa domain name would assist organizations as well as individuals in branding their activities online. The more small businesses and big businesses are online, identifying their services and products. Like, for example, we're talking about shoes. If it's shoes.africa versus shoes.com, people would know exactly where the shoes is from. So basically, it's more beneficial to small businesses that don't have the advertising budget or capacity to brand themselves online. And as we go in the future, when more top-level domain names are competitively coming into the internet namespace, then we will have, there will be too much competition, and people, it's just like any store. People would need to identify themselves or companies where they're from, and if they want to highlight they're from Africa or their product services are based in Africa, it helps partnership, it helps exactly the identity of the products and services. So that's basically the benefit to Africa. It's your online identity.
Actually, as a former private sector, I think if we are looking at helping ourselves, if we are looking at marketing ourselves, instead of having to wait for somebody to give us money to do things, marketing ourselves is very important. And thank you for your comment. And let me stop to thank you for your commitment. 1.2 million is not little money.
Thank you.
And I think for those of you, the startup companies, all the other companies who want to advertise online, maybe you should talk to her. All right. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I would need.
Thank you very much.
I want to ask my panel, just give them 1 minute each, even if it's to say thank you. 1 minute each. Let me start from the other end.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Is this on? Okay. Okay. So it's been a long day. We had a lot of good input from everybody, and I guess if there's one thing I want to leave you with, it would be basically that focus on education, focus on digital literacy. That'll build and enable the entrepreneurships that's required. Make sure your policies enable good, fundamental, sound, open business models so that people can make money. If people can make money, they create businesses. As they create businesses, they create jobs, right? If there's developing content, you need to make sure they're trained, there's training, but if there's a business model, you'll see how fast content can be developed by everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Well, I just wanted to summarize that to have 10 times cheaper services, 10 times more applications and content, develop 10 times faster. We need to be creative, and in Alcatel-Lucent, we like the model that Rwanda and KT are implementing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll make it quick. I would just say that in order to meet these data demands that we've been discussing today and to roll out this infrastructure, I think the key things on the regulatory perspective are that we're focusing on long-term, harmonized, clear and transparent policies that create a positive and predictable regulatory environment so that industry will continue to invest.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just to say that this has really been a pleasure for me. The one thing I would like to take away is to start thinking about the demand side for broadband, and a word that may mean different things to different people is, would governments think about sponsored connectivity for the rural underserved areas? Thank you.
Thank you. So, as I say, on behalf of NSN, I think it's been a tremendous event. I see a huge amount of optimism in the room. I think we've heard some leadership and some dreams, but some realistic dreams talked about yesterday, and the procedure moving forward. From our focus, again, we're focused on where we think the industry is headed to, the mobile broadband, and to answer my colleague's question of are we dreaming enough? When I look at what has been suggested to be brought into Rwanda by the KT and RDB joint venture, I think there's tremendous opportunities to showing what can be done. And I think, last but not least, that the opportunity is for Africa, but Africa has to work together to get the most benefit from it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much. I think we all know what we need to do, all the stakeholders in this journey. I think what's most important is acceleration of our initiatives. So we need to do things a little bit faster to be able to get the investments that are required to be able to service this sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think as we are dreaming in smart infrastructure, I would like us not to actually forget about the internet critical infrastructure. If we are thinking of a bold Africa that's really participate in global production and is also an Africa that really does business, we need to build an internet industry in Africa. So we need to better manage the critical resources that we do have.
Thank you very much. It's been a fantastic afternoon. You've been a fantastic audience. I've had a very informed, very distinguished panel. I've picked up that in order to build smart infrastructure, we need to have smart planning. We need to have smart planning at the national level. We need to have smart planning at the startups level. We need to support existing infrastructure and smarten it up. Let's not lose the investment that we put in. Let's smarten it up. Let's use it in a smart way. Let's dream big. Let's transform Africa. May I ask you to please thank my panel and thank yourselves. Good afternoon.